Funny thing is they all say I was the one who cut them off. But truth is I just stopped calling people who only remembered me when they needed something. And for nearly 5 years my phone stayed quiet. No birthdays. No holidays. Just silence. That morning started like most of mine did. Cool air, leaves on the sidewalk. Seattle in early fall had this calm sharpness to it, like the city was trying to stay polite while warning you winter was coming. I sat at my usual table in the corner of a cafe nobody I knew ever came to. That was the point. I had my notebook open. Tasting notes from last night's dessert trial. Lemon thyme tart needed less zest, more texture in the crust. Then my phone lit up. I almost didn't check it, but I did, and there it was. Bethany, my sister-in-law. I hadn't heard her voice in, God, at least 4 years. Not since she and Nate had their second baby. I let it ring once. Twice. I stared at the screen like it was a dare. Then I picked up. Camille. Her voice was soft. Unsure. Hey, I hope this number still works. I didn't say anything at first. I think I forgot how to. I know it's been a while, she went on. But Vanessa's getting engaged, and I wanted to invite you. Personally. There was a pause, not the awkward kind. The kind where both people know there's history but pretend it's not sitting right there between them. She picked the venue already, Bethany said, sounding nervous. It's this place called Maison R. Ever heard of it? I almost laughed. Almost. Heard of it, I said. I own it. Silence. Then a breath. Oh, wow. I didn't know. Vanessa loved the photos online and. It's fine, I said before she spiraled. Send me the details. I hung up not long after. Didn't promise I'd show. Didn't say I wouldn't. But the second I set the phone down, I knew I was going. Not to make a scene, not to prove anything. I just wanted to see if they'd treat me the same way they did when I left, as if I'd never be anything. Back then I was the girl who didn't finish school. The Mitchell who walked away. They didn't know I spent those years building something they said I couldn't. You're a Mitchell, my mother used to say. Mitchells don't cook. We open restaurants. We don't work in them. Well, guess I missed the memo. Maison R wasn't just another place. It was mine. Every dish, every light fixture, every candle on every table. And now they were coming into my world thinking it was just another trendy French place picked off Google. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, opened my planner, and wrote down 3 words: smile, sit, nod, and in smaller letters underneath. Don't reveal unless necessary. The next morning, I walked into the back kitchen. Marcus, my head chef, was prepping produce his usual jazz playlist humming low from the speakers. He looked up and raised an eyebrow. Family dinner, huh? I nodded. And said, just 5 words, if I nod you tell. He smirked. Didn't ask a thing. Didn't need to. The truth was I wasn't going to show them what I'd built. I was going to show them who I'd become. The dining room glowed like a photo from a magazine. Everything looked warm. Gentle, expensive. But I knew where the warmth came from. Because I was the one who picked those bulbs. Soft amber, not harsh white. I knew how light changed appetite. I walked in exactly at 7, not early, not late. I wore black. Tailored, clean. No jewelry. I didn't need to dress loud. They were already seated. Mom looked up first. Her smile was tight. Too quick. You look. Well, she said like it surprised her. Thanks, I said, taking my seat at the edge of the table. Not at the head. Not in the middle. Just present. Dad raised his glass slightly. Didn't speak, just a nod. He was always a man of few words unless it was to correct someone. Vanessa looked flawless, of course. Smooth bun, pale pink nails, a dress that probably cost more than I used to make in a month. Blake, her fiancé, was already talking. I still can't believe we got this reservation, he said. Maison R's usually booked out months ahead. A friend of mine, total insider, called in a favor. Guy named Patrick. Ring a bell, I blinked slowly. Nope, I said. Didn't offer more. Let the silence answer for me. Bethany gave me a small smile from across the table. She looked tired. Mom tired. 2 kids under 5 will do that to you. But she'd always been kind. The amuse-bouche arrived, compressed melon pickled shallot mint foam. Placed with care. I watched Vanessa frown at it. What is this, she asked, poking it with her tiny gold fork. Looks like soap bubbles. It's refreshing, Jonas said. Bethany nodded, very summery. Vanessa took a tiny bite, set it back down. Didn't speak. I didn't either. But I remembered the exact day Marcus and I developed that dish. We argued about the vinegar ratio for 2 hours, settled it over elderflower syrup. Then came the questions. Sharp but sugar-coated. So, Camille, Blake leaned in like he cared. Are you still in food? The pause before the last word wasn't long, but it was there. I am, I said. Oh, Vanessa jumped in. I thought you'd moved on from that hobby. Didn't you used to post about it? I gave her a small smile. Still do. Just not where you follow. That shut her up for a second. The next dish came. Heirloom tomato. Basil oil. House ricotta. My hands had shaped that ricotta 100 times. The texture had to walk the line, creamy but structured. Like silence during a family dinner. Mom took a bite, chewed slowly. Then said, a bit acidic. Don't they test these things? I sipped my water. Looked at her directly. They do, I said. Some recipes get tested dozens of times. Some 57. She didn't hear the number. Not really. She just reached for her wine. No one asked what I meant. Marcus passed by once, tall, composed, unreadable. He nodded at me. Barely. I gave a blink in return. The staff knew. They knew who I was. But we'd agreed tonight I wasn't the boss. I was just a guest. Blake tried again. So what is it you do now exactly? I folded my napkin on my lap. Still in food. And left it there. They didn't know I'd tested that tomato dish 57 times. They didn't know I'd built the wine pairings. The lighting. The playlist. They didn't know anything at all. This wine is decent, Blake said, swirling the glass like he knew what he was doing. It's no Chateau Margaux, but it'll do. He tilted the glass back, took a small sip, and nodded to himself like some self-made connoisseur. I said nothing. Didn't even blink. The bottle he just brushed off, as decent. I flew to Bordeaux to source it. Spent 3 days with the vineyard's 3rd-generation owner. Tasted 9 varietals, signed a private import agreement for this very vintage. But sure, it'll do. The light in the room had shifted. Golden earlier. Now softer. Candles on the table flickered against crystal glassware, casting shadows that made the linen glow cream instead of white. Marcus passed behind me. Silent, steady. Jessica followed with the next pour. She moved with the kind of grace that only came from years on the floor. She'd trained under me, now she trained others. But here tonight, I let her lead. That was the deal. So Camille, Vanessa said, placing her fork down like punctuation. What is it you really do? I mean, we keep asking, but you're very mysterious. Bethany looked up from her bread. Jonas shifted in his chair. I smiled. Still in food. Blake chuckled. So, catering. That's cute. Vanessa laughed just a little. Maybe we should have hired her for the wedding. The words slid across the table like condensation off a cold glass. Bethany didn't laugh. Neither did Dad. Then came the duck. Blake cut into his frown, lifted the piece with his fork like it was evidence in a crime scene. This is raw, he said. Can we? Yeah, I need this recooked. Jessica's eyes flicked toward me. 1 beat. 2. I gave the smallest nod. She took the plate back without a word. Marcus's footsteps didn't rush. He knew exactly what he was doing. 4 minutes later, the duck returned, drier, tougher, stripped of nuance. Blake took a bite. Smiled. Perfect, he said. See, just needed a little help. I looked down at my plate. Didn't eat. Didn't need to. Dessert was still 20 minutes away, but the sugar had long left the air. Vanessa and Blake were now dissecting wedding venues in Aspen. Dad chimed in with something about elevated elegance. Mom stirred her wine gently, lips pursed like she was tasting a memory instead of a drink. Jonas kept folding his napkin, then unfolding it. Bethany stared at the ceiling's wood beams like she could will herself into the drywall. Then softly but deliberately Mom leaned across the table toward me. "Camille," she said, "we can help you, you know. Financially." The silence fell like ash. No clang. Just a soft, choking drift. "This place. I mean, it's lovely," she went on. "But it's not exactly affordable, is it? Restaurants like this burn cash, sweetheart. And you, well, you've always had passion." There it was. The word. Passion. Their favorite way to say lack of direction. I felt my jaw tighten. But I didn't move. Didn't reach for the wine. Didn't say thank you. Because what would I thank them for? Blake already half a glass and laughed. "We should ask for a tour of the kitchen. I'd love to see what goes into these little plates." Little plates that took 14 hours to prep, 18 vendors to perfect, and a decade of my life to get right. The room had grown warmer. Or maybe it was just me. Then, like a silent cue, Marcus appeared, one hand behind his back, one in front of him holding the check presenter. He placed it gently beside Blake. "Compliments of the house," Marcus said, "but only in service." Blake smirked. He opened the leather fold with the flourish of a man used to impressing clients. His eyes scanned the total. They stopped moving. This can't be right." His voice had dropped. Almost polite now. But it was right. Every course. Every wine pairing. Every handmade plate. It was all his idea. Remember, I know a guy. He didn't know anything. I watched him shift in his seat. Watched Vanessa peek at the number and freeze mid-sentence. Mom glanced over, then quickly looked away. Dad cleared his throat. Bethany gently touched Jonas's arm as if to say, "Don't say a word." Across the room, Jessica stood at the far end, silent, but still. And me, I just folded my napkin. Because they didn't know I had tested that duck recipe 57 times, or that I'd interviewed every floor staff myself, or that the chairs they sat on were custom built to match the spine curve for long dinners. They didn't know anything. And I wasn't going to explain it. Not tonight. "This can't be right," Blake muttered, still staring at the bill like it had personally insulted him. The numbers weren't outrageous. Not for a place like this. Not for wine he claimed to appreciate. But it wasn't the number that made him sweat. It was the line items that were missing. No appetizers, no entrees, no dessert, just wine. And the words Maison R, executive comp. Marcus stood beside him, hands clasped behind his back. Still, patient. Blake tried again. "There must be a mistake. This only shows the drinks. Who paid for the rest?" Marcus leaned forward just slightly, voice smooth as the napkins on the table. "The meal has already been taken care of. By the owner." Blake blinked. "Well, who would that be?" he asked, half laughing, now trying to regain footing. And that's when Marcus turned. Not to Blake. Not to the table. To me. He waited. I gave him the nod. Small. Barely there. But it was enough. Marcus straightened, then turned back to the table. "Welcome back, Miss Rowan," he said. The room didn't fall silent. It froze. The candlelight still flickered. The glasses still caught reflections, but the space between everyone seemed to tighten, shrink like air pulling out of a room before a storm. Bethany's lips parted, then closed again. Jonas dropped his napkin. Vanessa's spoon clinked against her untouched creme brulee. She hadn't spoken yet. Not really. Mom was the first to shift. "Miss Rowan," she repeated, blinking. Blake sat back slowly in his chair. Vanessa stared at me. "You let us insult your food." I looked at her steady. "You didn't need help with that." I could have said more. But silence had already spoken loud enough. I placed my napkin on the table. Stood. Pushed the chair back just enough to rise without a sound. Their eyes followed me like I was someone they didn't know, which in truth I wasn't. I smoothed the fabric of my blouse, looked once at my mother. Her fingers trembled slightly against the stem of her wine glass. Dad was quiet now. His brow furrowed like he was trying to calculate how this happened without his approval. Vanessa finally found her voice again. But, how you were in culinary school, and then you disappeared. I didn't disappear, I said. I just stopped explaining myself. Blake scoffed. A restaurant like this. You expect us to believe you built all this. No, I replied soft, but steady. I don't expect you to believe anything. I built it anyway. Victoria leaned forward, her voice suddenly brittle. Camille, why wouldn't you tell us? I met her eyes. She still wore her pearls. Always had. Even when telling me I was embarrassing the family name by slinging pans. Because I needed to see, I said, who you all were when you thought I had nothing. That landed harder than I meant it to. But it was true. I hadn't come tonight to humiliate anyone. I'd come to witness them unfiltered, unrehearsed. And now I had. The door to the dining room opened gently. Miranda stepped inside. She wore all black, our signature service uniform, but her voice carried like a bell in soft velvet. Your investors are waiting, chef, she said. A pause. Then would you like coffee with the dessert course, or shall we bring it to the rooftop lounge? I turned back to the table. Their plates untouched, their judgments unraveled. No coffee, I said. Not tonight. Miranda nodded once. Held the door for me. I walked past the table. Past their silence. Past their disbelief. Past the girl they once called lost. And I didn't look back. No one looked me in the eye. Not right away. Not Mom still twisting her ring around her finger. Not Dad now pretending to study the stemware like it held answers. Not Blake, he was scrolling his phone under the table. Not Vanessa, she was busy dabbing her lips with a napkin that hadn't touched a crumb. Only Jonas. And even then only briefly. The staff moved like shadows around us. Clearing dishes, refilling water, never interrupting. Just enough presence to remind everyone. This wasn't their house. This wasn't their table, this was mine. Victoria was the first to speak. You should have told us, Camille, she said softly. We could have celebrated this. With you. I smiled gently. She meant well in the way people do when they're trying to rewrite history in real time. You didn't celebrate my passion, I said. You only respect results. Her mouth opened. Then closed. She folded her napkin carefully. Like it was an apology. Edward jumped in as expected. Crisis mode was his default setting. This is impressive, he said, tone brisk. But you could scale it, you know. Go national. I know investors, I'm not looking for investors, I said. My partners understand what this place is. He gave me a clipped nod like I'd rejected a merger proposal. Vanessa finally found her voice. It came sharp. Brittle. So that's what this was, a trap. You let us sit here and grovel. I turned to her. Calm. Always. No, I said, but asking me here to play the poor relative, that was manipulative. She went quiet. And that silence said more than her words ever could. Across the table, Blake cleared his throat. If you ever want to expand, he said, too casually, I know some people in the Napa scene. Real money. Real reach. I blinked once. Smiled like I'd been offered a used coupon. I think Maison R is doing just fine without wine bros and boat shoes. Jonas shifted in his seat. He hadn't said much all night, hadn't needed to. But now his voice cut through the brittle air, low, steady. This is incredible, Cam, he said. I'm sorry I didn't know sooner. He looked down when he said it, but the words still found me. Still landed. I gave him a soft nod. That means more than you think, I told him. And it did. Not because I needed validation, but because he looked. Because he saw me, not just the room. Across from me, Mom blinked fast. She was searching for some version of me she could hold on to. Some version that still needed her blessing. but that girl had gone quiet a long time ago. I folded my hands gently in front of me, looked at each face one by one. They weren't cruel people. Just small. Small in the way some families get when they mistake tradition for truth and status for strength. I stood slowly. My chair let out the faintest whisper against the wood. I didn't build this to prove myself to you, I said. I built it because I no longer needed your approval. No one argued. They knew better now. I took a breath, felt the weight of years begin to slip off like a coat that had clung too long. I have a kitchen waiting, I added. And a future that no longer fits at this table. Miranda appeared in the doorway as if on cue. But she said nothing. She didn't have to. They all watched me go. Not out of awe, not out of pride. Out of silence. And maybe, finally, respect. And for the first time in a long while I felt full. 2 weeks after that dinner, Maison R had returned to its rhythm. In the kitchen, knives tapped in a steady cadence between notes of lemon zest and warm olive oil. Outside the back window, Seattle's morning sun angled through the trees making the herb pots Zoe had just watered glisten. I stood in the middle of it all, arms folded back straight. There was no need to explain anything. Jessica was training 3 new interns, all young women, and their eyes sparkled brighter than any dish I'd ever plated. "Whisk with your wrist, not your whole arm," she said, gently adjusting Zoe's hand. Zoe giggled, poured a bit of lemon juice into the bowl and tasted the tip of the spoon. Still too shy," she said. I smiled. "Then speak louder, Zoe. With flavor." I had once been that girl with nothing but a spoon and a fragile belief in the flavors I loved. No one had told me I could. No one had told me I couldn't. My phone buzzed in the apron pocket. A message from Jonas lit the screen. "Eli wants to learn to make vinaigrette." I typed back Saturday. "Bring him hungry." Near noon, Bethany stopped by, coat wrapped, tight hair pulled back. She handed me a small parcel. "Found this in our garage," she said. "You lent it to me in college." I never read it, but figured it's time I returned it. I opened it. Salta World History. My old marginal notes still lined the pages in handwriting thin and careful. "Keep it," I said. It aged well. I returned to my desk, the one with no nameplate. It sat tucked behind the pantry wall where light came through, soft and gold, not harsh and fluorescent. There were no awards on the shelf. No newspaper clippings, no framed articles. Just scraps of recipe drafts, a stack of cookbooks dog-eared at the edges. And a single black notebook waiting open. I flipped to a fresh page. The pen felt just right in my hand. Steady. Like my voice had finally caught up to itself. At the top I wrote, "For the ones who didn't ask to be believed in but became undeniable anyway." I let the ink dry. Let the silence hold. Sometimes healing doesn't come with tears or reunions. Sometimes it comes in the form of knowing. You don't need either. A soft knock on the pantry frame broke the quiet. Jessica leaned in, smiling. "Chef," she said, "the press is here for your feature." I stood. Straightened my jacket. Tucked the notebook into the drawer. Then I followed her out past the spice rack and into the light. "Let's feed them the truth," I said. And just like that, I walked into the future I'd made with my own hands. One plate, one step, one unapologetic course at a time. There was a time I would have done anything just to be seen by them. Now I understand being seen isn't nearly as powerful as seeing yourself clearly. Some families lift you. Some teach you who not to become. Either way, you get to choose which legacy you live by. And sometimes peace begins the moment you stop performing for someone else's applause. If this story touched a part of you, feel free to share your thoughts. I'll be here reading quietly like always.